Severus Snape is one of the most interesting and complex characters in the Harry Potter series. His transition from a red herring villain to one of the most important heroes in the fight against Lord Voldemort makes him a fan favourite character. Many characters go through changes from the novels to the films. Luna goes from wacky but ultimately likeable conspiracy theorist to just eccentric and super nice. Barty Crouch goes from ridiculously strict, boring and ordered man to a slightly paranoid but kind of friendly ministry man. And Ludo Bagman goes from charismatic, popular but dodgy ex-sportsman to not existing.
But the change in Snape's character is one of the most interesting to look at, not just because he's so complex, but also because of how dramatic the change is. Although the majority of changes and tweaks to the character and his actions were done because of the nature of films compared to books, and the limited amount of time they have to tell the same story, these omissions are the movie canon, and must be treated as such, separating the Snapes into two distinct characters.
Let's jump straight in and compare their introductions in the Philosopher's Stone, from the feast to the first potions lesson. In both the book and the film, Snape looks directly at Harry while the back of Quirrell faces him, and Harry's scar hurts. This serves as a bit of a ruse to Snape's villainy, but also foreshadows Quirrell as the actual villain. However, the look that Snape gives Harry in the film is one of surprised realisation, and then concern as he notices Harry's pain and looks at Quirrell's turban. In the book, we get a bit more information from Harry's perspective, as is so often the case, and Harry gets
a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all.
The very next time that Harry sees Snape, in his first potions lesson, he remarks that he had been wrong.
Snape didn't dislike Harry, he hated him.
Unlike the movie, when Snape starts targeting Harry after he accuses him of not listening, in the book, Snape starts insulting Harry even when calling out the register. Even in the film's extended edition, Snape isn't that terrible during the potions lesson. Some of the looks he gives Harry are probably warranted given the piercing and hateful look Harry gives him. But, for me at least, the most important difference in the Philosopher's Stone is at the end, when Dumbledore reveals why Snape has been saving Harry's life throughout. The last mention of this in the film is by Quirrell at the Mirror of Erised during his confrontation with Harry, but in the books, Dumbledore explains Snape's motivations, which sets up the later instalments of the two mediums to have completely different versions of Severus Snape. When you watch the films, especially once you've already seen them and you know Snape is trying to save Harry, you get the impression that he is truly one of the good guys. He is the one to suspect Quirrell, and he goes out of his way to keep Harry safe, apparently being the only person other than Ron, Hermione and Hagrid to notice anything was wrong at Quidditch. But by the end of the book, Dumbledore tells Harry that Snape has been working so hard to protect him because he wanted to repay James Potter for saving his own life, so he could
go back to hating your father's memory in peace.
Suddenly, these acts of bravery throughout the first novel go from being pure acts of good to being part of an excuse to return to hatred. That being said, it doesn't at all nullify the good that Snape did, and with the whole series in context, we can imagine that Snape's motivation was perhaps more to do with his love for Lily Potter than his hatred for James. Snape still did good, but while we see movie Snape as Harry's saviour by the end of Philosopher's Stone, in the books we're more interested in Snape's relationship with James, and what more secrets will be revealed about their rivalry over the course of the series. Snape certainly isn't bad by the end of the book, but he's not the hero that we see at the end of the movie.
When reflecting on the character of Snape, we so often limit ourselves to thinking about his relationship with Harry, as the books and films are unsurprisingly told through the eyes of the boy who lived. But it is important to consider how Snape treats the other characters in his life, specifically those who don't carry the Potter surname, and how he behaves as a teacher, a servant, an ally, and a friend. Thanks to the nature of film, the audience spends much less time with movie Snape than with his literary counterpart, and I think that probably does the man a favour. While the novels give us an in-depth look at the everyday life of a Hogwarts student, the meals, the common room, the lessons, and the professors, the films can really only afford to show the moments that are vital to our characters and to the overall plot. In the films, Snape is so rarely shown interacting with any pupils other than Harry, Ron, Hermione, and, once they become Death Eater buddies, Draco. The students' attitude towards Professor Snape is rarely discussed in the films. Even Neville's fear of him is mostly just used for humour, as we've never seen the two of them interact. When properly considered, the idea of a 13-year-old boy's greatest, most terrifying thing he can imagine being his teacher is slightly disturbing, but we simply haven't seen enough of his bullying to understand that. In the book version of Professor Snape's Prisoner of Azkaban Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, he seems to bully every single pupil he interacts with, and characters like Parvati and Dean even stand up to him. Here, his horrible line to Hermione is met with shock and disgust, and the reaction to it is used to portray how the class feel about him.
It was a mark of how much the class loathed Snape that they were all glaring at him, because every one of them had called Hermione a know-it-all at least once.
And Ron gets himself a detention just by defending her. In the film adaptation, his rude attitude towards the class is reserved for Hermione alone, and the same line that was initially framed as a horrible, undeserved insult is instead played for laughs, as Ron agrees with his assessment.
That is the second time you've spoken out of turn, Miss Granger. Are you incapable of restraining yourself, or do you take pride in being an insufferable know-it-all?
He's got a point, you know.
The contrast between these events and the line's presentation is reflective of one of the strongest divides between the two Snapes. The strict teacher trying to shut up a rude, interrupting Hermione, and the bully trying to undermine Lupin's whole class. There are two main reasons behind these moments being so much harder to take seriously in the films. The first is what we mentioned before, the division of movie and book Snape's motivations. Quirrell's reveal paints Snape far nobler in the films than Dumbledore's explanation does in the book, and the subsequent films act as a continuation, turning movie Snape into just a strict teacher whose scenes are often played more for laughs, and leaving book Snape as a serious bully who actively makes the lives of our main characters worse. The other reason for the reduction of his cruelty is that The Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, Goblet of Fire, and Order of the Phoenix take place during a sort of grey area for the character, after his being a red herring villain in Philosopher's Stone, but before the introduction of his red herring villainousness for the rest of the series. His only real role in 2 and 3 is to act as a disciplinary figure when the boys majorly mess up, Jewel the bumbling idiot, and attempt to stop an escaped murderer from murdering again. He may be slightly misguided on the last one, but his intentions are in the right place. We may learn later on that Snape had other reasons for wanting to be the one to find Black, but he still didn't do anything out of the ordinary for a person confronted with someone they believed to be a mass murderer. As his importance in the series increases, his presence in the film remains relatively limited. Even in the film that's named after him, the subplot about his potions textbook is rather sidelined. The investigation into who the Half-Blood Prince is gets swept aside, and the reveal takes place 35 minutes after the book was last seen or even mentioned, leaving it feeling unimpactful and unearned.
I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
A very important part of how a character is forged on film and TV is of course the performance of the actor playing them, and Alan Rickman's performance is no exception. His take on the character is one of the aspects that defines movie Snape the most, and separates it from book Snape. In an interview in 2011, before the release of the final movie, Rickman remarks that
You're told that he never really raises his voice above, he doesn't really shout.
while this perfectly suits movie Snape, it's not quite true for book Snape. In fact, apart from Harry, Snape is probably the person who shouts the most memorably at the end of The Prisoner of Azkaban, when he finds that Sirius has escaped and is convinced that Harry has something to do with it.
"You don't know Potter!" shrieked Snape. "He did it! I know he did it!"
Alan Rickman plays Snape calmer, more controlled and focused than he is in the books, and while book Snape is often well composed, he still loses that composure from time to time. Rickman also often talks about how focused Snape is, and when asked whether he saw Snape as bad, he crucially replied,
You know, there's some part of the answer in that is that they're all just people to me.
but it's very clear that he has a huge amount of respect for Snape. But of course, one of the most important aspects of Snape to look at when deciphering his character is just how he treats our famous protagonist. Not just because Harry is so important to the story, but because we almost exclusively follow the story through Harry's eyes, meaning our perception of the Snapes is so often tied directly to Harry's. We've already talked about the differences in the way book and movie Snape treat Harry in the first instalment of the series, but it's when we look at how he treats Harry as a whole that we start understanding the most about both Snapes. Throughout the novel, Snape treats Harry with disdain and hatred, seeing him as a reincarnation of James Potter, and using every opportunity to put Harry down, whether it's trying to humiliate him during the dueling club, or have him punished for putting his name in the Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore himself observes that,
"You see what you expect to see, Severus."
after Snape starts whining about how arrogant Harry is during his first year. Snape constantly compares Harry to James, and during Harry's third year even extends his hatred unfairly to Lupin, culminating in Snape absolutely losing it at Harry at the end of the novel. We learn in the Order of the Phoenix novel that James Potter was equally as horrible to Snape as Snape is to Harry, perhaps even worse. This puts Harry in a very bad place, as his impeccable reputation of his father is besmirched, and his ability to blindly idolise his parents is lost. While this revelation does certainly not excuse Snape's behaviour, it makes it far more understandable. For Snape to have endured so much bullying as a child, on top of all the pain he suffers after school, some unpleasantness is surely to be expected. Snape's memory scene shows us that he suffers so much growing up, and the only person with whom he ever experiences any kind of friendship or happiness is Lily, so of course he's going to fall for her. It's equally easy to imagine that once he's been placed in Slytherin surrounded by mini Death Eaters, that the young and impressionable Severus would have been taken in, accepted for the first time in his life by people like McNair and Mulciber. But despite being pulled along to the Death Eater club, he proves he's willing to do the right thing by leaving Lord Voldemort to work for the Order of the Phoenix. We're also shown the moment when Snape informs Dumbledore that Karkaroff plans to flee during the events of the Triwizard Tournament, and he reaffirms that
I am not such a coward.
Dumbledore replies with a very interesting notion.
You are a braver man by far than Igor Karkaroff. You know, I sometimes think we sought too soon.
Harry is treated terribly by Snape, who can't help but see him as the man who made his own school life a nightmare, and attempt to do the same. But Snape, whose positive motivations surrounding Harry are defined by his love for Lily, still seeks to protect Harry. But outside of Harry, it is clear that Snape fights for good. His bravery is commended by Dumbledore, he tells Phineas Nigellus off for calling Hermione a mudblood, and he does his best to save as many lives as he can, even Lupin's during the Deathly Hallows. This contrast within Snape, however, between what he does wrong to Harry and others and how he still seeks to protect them, is not seen as starkly in the films. Snape is not nearly as cruel to Harry, and with this in mind, a good comparison to be made between the two is Harry's occlumency lessons. While Book Snape clearly wants Harry to learn occlumency, he is exceptionally nasty during their lessons, and uses them to insult Harry and Sirius. In the film, however, Snape still insults Sirius and Harry and even goes on a small rant about James, but it's clear that he's trying to do this to motivate Harry to learn, not just to annoy him.
Then prove it. Control your emotions. Discipline your mind.
Snape's occlumency lessons in the books are full of arguments and retorts, both Harry and Snape constantly having a go at each other, but in the film, Harry only retorts when Snape is talking about Harry's father, when Snape uses that to motivate him. Of course, Snape is still furious when Harry sees the memory, but it's not quite the fury of Book Snape. Movie Snape simply isn't as nasty as Book Snape. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he doesn't bully Harry at all, and of course there's that famous moment where he throws himself in front of the Golden Trio, despite being very obviously terrified of the werewolf. Crucially, Lupin never says it's Snape who lets slip that he's a werewolf, despite the fact that it was him in the books. So this must have been a deliberate decision by the filmmakers not to make it Snape who revealed Lupin's condition, because it doesn't suit movie Snape. He hasn't built up the nasty reputation that Book Snape has, and therefore it would be out of character for the man we know.
There are two key changes in lines of dialogue when Snape and Dumbledore are discussing Lily Potter's safety. In the book, Snape approaches him asking for the protection of Lily alone, admitting that he asked the Dark Lord to spare her and kill only her husband and son. It is only after Dumbledore expresses his disgust at Severus's disregard for their lives that he suggests hiding them all. This interaction makes him come across far more selfish than movie Snape, who simply says,
Hide her. Hide them all. I beg you.
But that isn't the only minor tweak to a line that creates a big partition between the Snapes. There is also a key moment when he produces the Doe Patronus. Both moments start with Dumbledore asking if, after all this time, he had grown to care for the boy. Movie Snape does not respond verbally, answering Albus's question by producing Lily's Patronus. A viewer can interpret this as him saying he does care for Harry, because he is the son of the woman he loved. Book Snape, on the other hand, says two small words before he casts the spell.
For him! Shouted Snape. Expecto Patronum!
With this, he denies feeling any care towards Harry himself, reducing his reasons for protecting him to the preservation of Lily's memory and the sacrifice she made. The changes and omissions all add up to one major divide between the two Snapes: their redemption. There is a significant disparity between how easy it is for an audience to forgive him. It's possible to believe that both are heroes, but movie Snape has been shown to do such a small number of dastardly deeds that there is so much less we need to forgive him for, whereas readers of the novels need to overcome a number of moral hurdles for Snape that the film adaptations never touch upon. The discrimination he shows by calling Lily a mudblood, the possessiveness he shows towards her in saying that he won't let her spend time with James, and the creepy obsession he displays when he takes the photo of Harry, Lily and James and cuts Lily out for himself. In the end, both characters do the right thing, overcoming a bombardment of circumstances that would turn most men completely evil, and Harry was right to call him the bravest man he'd ever known. But there are far more legitimate things for a reader to hold against him than a film viewer.
Both movie and book Snape make serious mistakes, but when it comes down to it, they both seek to right the wrongs they committed in their past. Whether or not they truly do redeem themselves at the end is up to the reader and the viewer, but I think it is, perhaps surprisingly, Sirius Black who most accurately describes the journey of Severus Snape.
Besides, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are.
Really? Always.
Thank you very much for watching this week's video. Please leave a like below if you enjoyed it, and a comment if you want to share your own thoughts on Snape and his character. As you hopefully noticed, it was not just me this week, as I was joined by aspiring writer and good friend, Joe.
Hello. Thank you to Dougie for letting me help out this week. As he said, I'm trying to be a writer. There'll be a link to my blog in the description below, so do check that out if you have the time. I'm also hoping to start up my own YouTube channel, so watch this space. Thanks again for watching, and have a nice week. Have a nice week.